James had worked hard his entire life. He wasn't born into wealth, but he believed in earning his success. After years of long hours at his job, saving every penny he could, he finally had enough to make a dream come true: a beautiful pool in his backyard. It wasn't just about having a place to cool off during the summer. To James, it was a symbol of everything he had accomplished. He had built a good life for himself, and now he could enjoy it with his family. His wife and kids were just as excited. The pool was their new favorite spot. They splashed around on hot afternoons, had barbecues on the weekends, and sometimes just relaxed by the water, enjoying the peace that came with it. But not everyone was happy about James' success. His next-door neighbor, Karen, had always found a way to make him feel unwelcome. From the day he moved in, she treated him differently. While she smiled and waved at other neighbors, she only ever gave James cold stares. She made comments about how this neighborhood has changed, and even suggested, in a fake friendly voice, that he might be more comfortable somewhere else. James ignored her. He wasn't going to let one bitter person ruin his happiness. But when Karen saw his new pool, something in her snapped. Every time she looked out her window, she saw James and his family laughing and enjoying themselves. It made her furious. In her mind, he wasn't supposed to have something so nice. She had spent years seeing herself as better than him, and now, his success felt like a personal insult. She muttered under her breath whenever she saw him outside. She started blasting loud music whenever his kids were playing in the yard. And then, one day, she decided that watching him enjoy his pool was too much. She didn't just want to make him uncomfortable anymore. She wanted to take something away from him. And the more she thought about it, the more she convinced herself that she had the perfect plan. Late one night, Karen stood at her window, staring at James' pool. The water reflected the soft glow of his patio lights, completely still in the quiet darkness. She gritted her teeth. It wasn't fair. She had lived in this neighborhood longer than he had. She didn't want to see him smiling in her neighborhood. Then, she had an idea. A cruel, dangerous idea. She had read about dry ice before, how it turns into thick fog when dropped in water. But that wasn't the dangerous part. Dry ice didn't just create spooky mist, it released carbon dioxide, which could make it hard to breathe. If someone swam in a pool filled with too much of it, they could pass out. Karen smiled to herself. If James got into that pool, he wouldn't even realize what was happening until it was too late. He would think something was wrong with the water, and maybe, just maybe, he would regret ever moving into her neighborhood. She waited until the entire street was quiet. Then, she grabbed a large bag of dry ice she had bought earlier, wrapped herself in a dark hoodie, and slipped out her back door. She crept toward James' fence, carefully pushing open the side gate. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from excitement. She was really going to do this. Stepping up to the edge of the pool, she reached into the bag and pulled out a solid chunk of dry ice. It was ice cold, burning her fingers slightly, but she didn't care. With a smirk, she tossed it into the water. The chunk hit the surface and immediately started bubbling, releasing a ghostly mist across the pool. She dropped in another. And another. Soon, thick white fog spread across the surface, swirling in the dim light. She imagined James stepping outside the next morning, confused. Maybe he'd get in without realizing something was wrong. Maybe he'd panic when he started feeling dizzy. Karen let out a quiet laugh, satisfied with her work. In her mind, she had won. She had reminded him of his place. But what she didn't know was that James had already outsmarted her. And before the night was over, he would make sure she paid for what she had done. James woke up early the next morning, ready to enjoy another peaceful day. The sun was shining, the air was warm, and he had planned to take a quick swim before starting his day. But as he stepped outside and looked at his pool, something immediately seemed off. A thick white mist hovered over the water, twisting and curling like ghostly fingers reaching for the sky. His heart sank. That wasn't normal. He stepped closer and noticed the water was bubbling slightly, almost like a soda fizzing up after being shaken. A strange, Heavy feeling settled in his chest. He knew something was wrong. His kids could have jumped in without realizing it. His wife could have gone for an early swim. The thought of what could have happened made his stomach twist. James had learned to be cautious, especially after dealing with his neighbor Karen. Over the past year, she had done little things to make life harder for him, like dumping trash near his yard or calling the city to complain about imaginary violations. Just a few months ago, he had finally decided to install security cameras around his house. It was the best decision he had ever made. Pulling out his phone, James quickly scrolled through the footage from the night before. At first, he only saw his backyard, still and silent under the moonlight. But then movement. A shadow slipped through the side gate. His finger hovered over the screen as he zoomed in. It was Karen. She wore a dark hoodie, but there was no mistaking that face. She carried something, a bag, and moved quickly toward the pool. Then, she started tossing in what looked like chunks of ice. Within seconds, the water had started fogging up. James' jaw clenched. He rewound the video and watched it again. His fingers tightened around his phone as the reality sank in. She hadn't just trespassed onto his property, she had tried to poison his pool. This wasn't some petty act of jealousy. This was attempted murder. James took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. He could have died. His children could have died. All because Karen couldn't stand to see a black man enjoying the same luxuries as her. But she had made one big mistake. She had forgotten about the cameras. James wasn't about to let this go. She needed to face the consequences. Without hesitating, he dialed the police. When the police arrived, James was ready. He met them at the front of his house, his phone in hand, the security footage loaded and waiting. The officers listened as he explained the situation, then followed him to the backyard to see the pool for themselves. The mist had mostly faded, but the water still had an eerie, unnatural look to it. One officer crouched down and took a sample while another watched the video. James kept his eyes on them, waiting for their reaction. He didn't have to wait long. The officer reviewing the footage frowned. "This is serious," he said. She knew exactly what she was doing. One officer stayed behind to document everything while the others walked straight to Karen's house. James followed at a distance, watching as they knocked on her door. It took a moment, but eventually, Karen opened it. She looked tired, her face slightly puffy like she had just woken up. When she saw the officers, her expression flickered between confusion and annoyance. "Can I help you?" she asked, crossing her arms. "Ma'am, we need to speak with you about an incident that took place last night at your neighbor's property," one of the officers said firmly. Karen's eyes darted to James, who stood a few steps behind them, his arms crossed. A flash of something, nervousness, flickered across her face, but she quickly covered it up with a fake smile. "I have no idea what you're talking about," she said with a forced laugh. "Is this about that pool? I saw some weird fog earlier, but I didn't do anything." The officer didn't even blink. "We have video footage of you entering the property and tampering with the pool." Karen's face went pale. For a second, she just stood there, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the right words. Then, she let out another nervous laugh. "Oh, come on," she said, waving a hand. "That was just a harmless prank. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone." James stepped forward, his voice steady but firm. "A prank? You dumped dry ice into my pool, hoping it would hurt me or my family. That's not a joke. That's a crime." Karen's fake smile dropped. "Look, I wasn't thinking, okay? It was stupid, but do we really need to involve the police? We're neighbors." She looked at James, her voice turning desperate. "Can't we just work this out?" James shook his head. "Would you have asked me for mercy if my kids had drowned?" Karen's mouth snapped shut. The officers didn't wait for more excuses. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for trespassing, destruction of property, and reckless endangerment," one of them said. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back." Karen gasped. "Wait, no! Please, this is ridiculous. She looked around, as if hoping someone would step in and defend her. But the only people watching were neighbors who had stepped outside, drawn by the commotion. Some even had their phones out, recording everything. As the officers cuffed her, she turned back to James. Please, she begged. You don't have to do this. James stared at her for a long moment, then simply said, Neither did you. And with that, Karen was led away, her head hanging in shame as the entire neighborhood watched. Justice had finally caught up with her. Karen squirmed in the officer's grip as they led her toward the police car, her wrists secured in cold metal handcuffs. Her once confident expression had completely crumbled. Instead of the smug smirk she often wore when taunting James, her face was streaked with panic. This is insane, she shrieked. I didn't do anything that bad. But the police weren't listening. One of the officers read her rights while the other checked her ID. Her desperate pleas didn't matter, there was hard evidence. The video clearly showed her sneaking onto James' property and dumping dry ice into his pool. There was no way she could twist the truth now. As she was being escorted to the police car, a few neighbors had gathered outside their homes. Some of them had heard the commotion, and others had received text messages from friends, telling them to come out and witness what was happening. One woman, an elderly neighbor named Mrs. Lopez, shook her head in disappointment. I always knew she had a nasty attitude, she muttered, watching Karen struggle. But this is just evil. A younger couple across the street recorded the arrest on their phones. Oh, this is definitely going online, one of them whispered, already typing a caption, Racist Karen arrested after trying to poison black neighbor's pool. Karen noticed the phones pointed at her and gasped. Stop recording me! This isn't fair, she wailed, twisting her body away from the cameras. I don't deserve this. But James, standing just a few feet away, felt no sympathy. This woman had risked his life, his family's life, all because she couldn't stand to see a black man succeed. And now, she was facing the consequences of her actions. The officer helped her into the back seat of the police car. The door slammed shut behind her, locking her inside. Karen's face was flushed red with embarrassment, her lips trembling as she stared out the window at the neighborhood that had turned against her. As the car pulled away, James finally exhaled. It was over. The woman who had spent so much time trying to make his life miserable was finally facing justice. But what happened next shocked everyone. Within hours, footage of Karen's arrest spread across social media like wildfire. The video from James' security cameras, along with clips of her crying in the back of the police car, flooded the internet. People all over the country were outraged. Comments poured in. This woman is a danger to society. She literally tried to kill them. She deserves jail time. Imagine being this bitter over a pool. She ruined her whole life for nothing. Even news stations picked up the story, labeling her as another Karen, who had let racism and jealousy destroy her life. By the time Karen was processed at the police station, she had no idea that she had become infamous. But soon she would realize, her punishment was only just beginning. Karen's legal troubles were far from over. After being charged with multiple crimes, trespassing, destruction of property, reckless endangerment, and even attempted harm, she faced serious consequences. The judge didn't go easy on her. The courtroom was packed on the day of her trial. Reporters, neighbors, and even strangers who had followed the case online wanted to see how justice would be served. When the evidence was presented, there was no doubt about her guilt. The video footage, the police report, the scientific proof of the dry ice reaction, it was all stacked against her. Karen sat at the defendant's table, her once arrogant posture now replaced with slumped shoulders and teary eyes. She tried to apologize, claiming she wasn't thinking straight, and that she never meant to actually hurt anyone. But the judge wasn't having it. You deliberately entered private property and committed an act that could have resulted in serious injury or death, the judge said sternly. This was not a mistake. This was a crime fueled by hate, and you must face the consequences. Karen was sentenced to community service, heavy fines, and probation. There was also talk of possible jail time if she violated any conditions. But her punishment didn't end there. The internet never forgets. After her arrest, Karen lost her job. Her employer didn't want to be associated with someone who had committed a hate crime. She also became a local outcast. People refused to speak to her, stores avoided serving her, and even her own friends distanced themselves. Meanwhile, James' life changed for the better. Strangers reached out to show their support. A local pool company offered to clean and repair his pool for free. One of his neighbors, a lawyer, even volunteered to help him take legal action against Karen if needed. His story had inspired people. The community came together, proving that racism and hatred would not be tolerated. Even people who had previously stayed silent about Karen's behavior now openly condemned her actions. And James? He felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: peace. No longer did he have to worry about Karen's constant harassment. No longer did he have to feel unsafe in his own home. His children could swim in their pool without fear. His family could enjoy their backyard without looking over their shoulders. Karen had tried to destroy his happiness, but in the end, she had only destroyed herself. James had won, not just in court, but in life. Because no matter how much hate tries to tear someone down, justice always finds a way to rise.